After the drug bust at Keith Richards' home in 1967, the Stones decided to take a trip to Morocco, as a way to run away from all the worries and problems they had in Britain. But the trip turned out to be insanely chaotic, and it marked the end of an era for the group. It was the end of the first era of the band, when a bunch of rhythm and blues enthusiasts suddenly found themselves at the center of the music world, and it was the beginning of a more bohemian and decadent era which came to define their work from the late 60s and early 70s. The trip also marked the end of Anita Pallenberg's relationship with Brian Jones, and the beginning of her relationship with Keith Richards, which changed Brian's relationship with the Stones in a big way. Tom Keylock, who was the Stones' minder and driver, was a first-hand witness of everything that happened during the chaotic trip to Morocco. Several years later, Tom Keylock spoke about that period and shared his recollections about the trip. This video will be mostly focused on his recollections. So, without further ado, here's the story of the trip that changed the Stones forever. Let's begin.
I drove Keith's Bentley across to France alone, while Brian and Anita, Keith and some bird called Debbie Dixon flew over. Debbie was going out with a friend of the band, a director named Donald Camel, although I think she had ideas of making up a cozy little foursome with Keith. We were all to meet at the Georges Sang Hotel in Paris, then drive down to Tangier and meet up with Mick, Marianne, Michael Cooper, and Christopher Gibbs. Simple. That trip was a nightmare. I booked all the rooms and dumped the luggage in them. Anita must have had more clothes with her than Dorothy Perkins. I always hated carrying her bags, fucking dozens of them. The first bit of aggravation started the next day when we were checking out of the Georges Sang Hotel. I went to sort out the bill. I was going to pay using Keith's Diners Club card because they never seemed to have any cash on them and I was fucked if I was going to pay. The hotel manager comes out and informs me, "Sorry sir, we don't accept Diners Club." "That's okay," I says. "I'll be back in a minute." I went to Keith's room, got his checkbook out of his bag, and returned to the front desk. I said to the manager, "Could you work it out in English?" "Certainly, sir," he replies. So I get the bill, and in those days you could only take £15 out of England at a time, and the bill was about 5 times that, plus I couldn't be fucked about getting Keith to sign it, so I signed it myself. Keith Richard handed it back and rushed back to the rooms to get everyone out quick. I told Keith what was happening and said, "Come on out lively, I think we're going to get a pull." Just then the phone rang and it's the concierge asking for me to come back down. "Fuck it, he's sussed it," I tell Keith. And he's saying, "Sort them out, we'll get in the car." Keith and Brian were very close at this point and game for anything, so they got their bags and go heading for the car while I report back to the front desk. "This is no good," says the manager. He's going mad, holding Keith's check up. "This no good, you not only forged check, you forged signature." "Well, send the bill to Alan Klein," I said. "He'll pay it in American money." No, we can't do that. You have no account here, I call the police." With that, he's straight on the blower. It's now getting out of hand, because they have now seen Keith and Brian throwing the bags into the car, with Anita's feathers going everywhere. Wait, the manager's shouting, so I managed to calm him down by saying I'll pay the bill in dollars myself. "Very good, sir," says the manager, and he puts the phone down. So I pull out a different checkbook, grab Keith out of the car and say, "Sign this." Keith signs it and I give it to the manager, who recognizes that it's Keith who signed it with his own name and begrudgingly storms off. I turns to Keith and says, "We'd better go now, get in the fucking car." We hit the gas and whoosh, we're off, just as the manager and half the staff come running out of the hotel, yelling at us to stop. "Now what's up with him?" Brian asks. Keith couldn't stop laughing. Keith said, "Tom just palmed him off with a Lloyds Bank Regent Street check, written out in dollars." The journey to Toulouse was like Cliff Richard's summer holiday. It was coming up to Brian's birthday and he was in a great mood, intent on celebrating in style. He was smoking a lot of hash and drinking heavily in the back of the car during the journey, until he came over really ill with what I put down to as an asthma attack combined with too much dope and booze. I mean, it doesn't take Einstein to realize if you've got a bad asthma problem. You don't smoke your fucking head off in a confined space in the back of a bleeding car. We took him to a hospital near Toulouse and they admitted him straight away. He looked that bad. I found the rest of us a hotel nearby and booked us in. This one took Diners Club. called the office in London and told them our position, then went back to see how he was. The doctor said he wanted to keep him in for a few days, so I thought, well, that's the end of the trip. But Brian called us in and in true heroic style told us to carry on in the morning without him, saying he would catch up with us later. He insisted until Keith agreed. I didn't want to leave him there because I was mainly there to look after him, and it was his birthday after all. But Keith was paying and we were all in his car, so it was settled. The next unexpected change of plan comes courtesy of Debbie Dixon, who the following morning informs me she's going home 4 days into the trip. This is later explained away by the sight of Keith and Anita emerging together ever so coyly into the hotel. I thought, this is getting worse. We checked out and I rang the hospital and left a message telling Brian we would be in touch that night from our next stop, which was Valencia. Now this is a typical example of Brian. In the one breath he's told us to go on without him, and in the next I find out he's rung the office in London and told them we've fucked off and left him. So now there's only Keith and Anita left in the back. We head out over the mountains of the Azure, beautiful countryside, and through Andorra. It's fantastic weather, and it's all getting very friendly in the back seat. So much so, it got a bit difficult to concentrate on the road. They were up to all sorts. I kept reminding myself it was none of my business what they got up to. And Keith knew I kept my mouth shut, so when upon arriving in Valencia and Keith told me to book only 2 rooms, the same rule applied. I watched in disbelief as the two scampered up the stairs together. The writing was on the wall for those two, I thought.
Now I know she's waiting.
Fully expecting to see no more of Keith that night, I settled in at the hotel bar and ordered the first of what I considered a well-deserved drink. A couple of hours later, and about half a bottle of whiskey later, suitably refreshed and ready for bed, I was pissed off to see Keith and Anita heading over to my perch. "Let's go out, Tom. Know any clubs?" Keith had an insatiable appetite for everything. Anyone else would have been content to have an early night with Anita, but with Keith it's never enough. He's always moving on to the next thing. I dragged myself away from the bar and reluctantly got back in the car, followed by Keith and Anita, giggling like a couple of naughty school kids. I managed to find a club, thankfully not too far from the hotel. We got a table and I managed to keep one eye open and sink a few more whiskeys, while Keith and Anita drank, smoked, smooched, and generally larked about, looking blissfully happy with themselves. Then came the time to leave. The bill came to me and Keith gave me his diner's card and left without giving his signature, so I signed it Keith Richards again. I began to leave when the manager comes back and asks, "Which one of you is Keith Richards?" "He is," I reply, pointing over to Keith. "Could you sign this again, please?" the manager asks, pushing the bill back at me. I, in turn, give it to Keith and tell him to sign it. Now the manager is well and truly aggravated, having seen us both sign the same name. "You wait here," he says. The next thing I know, the police are all over us demanding our passports. "Passaporte, passaporte." "I haven't got them," I innocently replies. "I left them at the hotel." Now Keith's getting annoyed and he's yelling at me saying, "Go and get the fucking things." The police didn't speak much English, so it was obvious they were going to take us in and worry about it all later. We were taken to the police station and interrogated for fucking hours, them speaking hardly any English and me speaking no Spanish. Anita turned out to be a right bitch. She was fluent in about a dozen languages, and she could have got it sorted out a lot quicker, but she didn't do a thing. Eventually, I was escorted back to the hotel at daybreak and was allowed to get the passports. We settled the bill and were released. Keith continued giving me a bollocking for not carrying the fucking things, saying it was all my fault. Never mind the fact Anita hadn't said a fucking word. We got back to the hotel and there was a telegram from Brian telling Anita to go back to the hospital for him, as he was being discharged soon. I gave it to Anita and she screwed it up. Brian, assuming we simply hadn't received it, sent another telegram, this time to the office in London, saying he felt much better and asking if they could book him on the first available flight to Tangier. He signed off by saying he would recuperate fully in the sun. We drove down to Marbella, where we booked in for a few nights at this hotel, which was a bit of a regular haunt for the Stones and their ever-widening circle of beautiful people and hangers-on. So we always got well looked after, best food, best service, and the most discreet staff. Always ready to turn a blind eye, if you know what I mean. All in all, it was the perfect setting for the blossoming, risky love affair that I'd been witnessing in my rearview mirror to cement itself. Anita, in all her wisdom, had decided to return to Toulouse for Brian. I'd greeted the news with a familiar, shrugged acceptance and said nothing, for nothing remained beyond Anita. Both she and Keith sat silently in the back, lost in thought, staring blankly out of the windows throughout the journey to the airport. I wanted to ask what was going on, but the eerie silence told me that I'd be better off saying nothing. We saw her off, and I turned to Keith, hoping for an explanation. "She'll be back." That's all he said. And with that, he strolled purposely back to the Bentley. Keith made for miserable company for the remainder of the journey through Gibraltar and North Africa, so I was more than glad when we finally hit Tangier. Mick, Christopher Gibbs, Michael Cooper and Brian Gyson had already checked in at the El Minza Hotel and were sitting by the pool, looking very relaxed. Keith went over to join them, while I checked us both in. I noticed that Brian was booked in a room with Anita while Keith only had a single room reservation. This was worse than a fucking carry-on film, I thought. The first I knew of Brian's arrival in Marrakesh was the sound of his voice coming from the room along the corridor. He was screaming at Anita. He obviously knew something had gone on between her and Keith, but not to what extent. I knew he would want to grill me for what I knew, so I decided to make myself scarce. After all, Anita was the sort of bird who'd fill in the gaps for him. She enjoyed rubbing people's noses in the shit. And what she didn't tell him, she'd leave to his imagination. I decided to take some holiday snaps in order to take some of the tension out of the air. The atmosphere was so bad, and anyway, Cecil Beaton, the royal smudger, was in the hotel, taking pictures of the band. Brian started drinking heavily, his mood getting more and more morose. It was getting late now, and he was getting himself into a right state. I sat in a dark corner of the bar, out of sight, so I could keep an eye on him, but he somehow managed to slip out without me seeing him. I was still meant to be looking after him, so I dragged myself away from the bar and began patrolling the streets, looking for him. I soon tired of that and figured he'd make his way back eventually, and he might even have calmed down a bit, so I went back to the bar to wait. Well, he found his way back all right, but he certainly wasn't calm. He was completely off his crust, staggering through the lobby, sandwiched between these two dodgy-looking Berber prostitutes. The ones that have those peculiar blue tattoos all over them, the type made up of thousands of little blue dots. Horrible. Brian was fascinated by the tattoos. They tattooed every part of their bodies, if you know what I mean, and they don't come cheap. Those two cost Brian a fortune. They were holding Brian up and heading for Anita's room. I followed them up the stairs, trying to point out the error of his plan, but he wasn't having any of it. All hell broke loose when they reached the room. Brian had the idea that he was going to get Anita to perform with these two birds. Anita naturally declined the offer, and Brian smashed the room to bits. Anita grabbed her clothes and legged it to Keith's room, leaving Brian with these women amongst the wreckage. It was very symbolic. Looking at Brian, I thought, "That's your lot, mate. You've really blown it this time." That moment was the beginning of the end for him, and you know what? I think he knew it too.
I wasn't surprised it had come to a head. Brian was violent. He was a very unhappy person. It had been bad for a while, but became unbearable. Keith was always a gentleman, and he was a sort of knight in shining armor who was able to sweep her away. I think he'd been in love with Anita for quite some time, but hadn't been able to say a word.
This was the start of Brian's deliberate exclusion from the band. Nothing was said, but you could feel it. Everyone was uncomfortable around Brian. Terrible atmosphere. Much, much worse than before. Uptight. Keith had arranged for he and Anita to escape, and a plan was hatched for Brian Jason to take Brian up the Atlas Mountains to where that tribe of Arabs played pipes and whatnot. Brian wanted to record them. I think he had already done a bit with them, and he was anxious to go again. It's always been said that I got him out of the way in order to work for Keith. Swap loyalties, that sort of thing. But that's not how it happened. Sure, I got on with Keith, probably the best out of them all. But I didn't maneuver myself into Keith's life at Brian's expense. I really cared for the boy, but he really had gone too far. Jason took him off and got him completely stoned with these nutters he knew, the Medjdouri brothers. He was hardly looking out for his welfare either. No sooner had he gone, Keith and Anita were parking the car up. I asked Keith, "What about when he gets back?" "Fuck him," was his reply. "We're leaving the bastard here and you're driving." So that was that. I drove the getaway car. We motored to Tangiers, where we stopped for the night and got the ferry the following morning. Brian had evidently gone back to the hotel and found that everyone, including Mick, had checked out. That must have really hurt. I heard later that Jason had to call a doctor in order to give him a jab so he would sleep. Well, Brian had all these problems for sure, but then didn't we all? And some of mine were about to start. I'd bought a big block of hash off of a dealer called Ahmed in Tangiers, thinking it would last us on the journey home if we was careful, but I hadn't bargained on Anita's antics. She started showing off to all the Arabs, waving her feathers about, playing up to them, turning what was already the most conspicuous-looking vehicle traveling on the ferry into a fucking sideshow. And there she was, actually drawing a fucking crowd. It was only a matter of time before the police would get wind of us. Sure enough, I spotted these two plainclothes coppers lurking in the crowd. I could tell them a mile off. I just knew it. I turned to Keith and said, "Listen, that's old Bill over there and I'm holding the gear. I'm gonna dump it." "No, no, no," Anita pipes up. "Don't dump it." I told her, "Leave off. I'm not getting my collar felt for drugs." That's all I need to wind up in a prison out here. While we were having our whispered argument, I hadn't noticed that the two suspect coppers were almost on top of us. "Quick, head for the car," I said under my breath. That's when it became obvious they were police because they followed right after us. I couldn't get the fucking hash out of my pocket quick enough to drop it before we had reached the car, so with Keith and Anita blocking the coppers' view, I pushed the button that opened the petrol cap automatically and chucked it in and slammed it shut with about a second to spare. I was fumbling with my keys just as they walked to the front of the car. I put the keys back in my pocket and mumbled something about getting it later. Just what later meant I'm fucked if I knew. I turned on my heels and walked away from the car. Keith and Anita had kept on walking. Fucking hell, thanks Keith, I thought. Did they see me or not? They never said a word. They walked around the car and I slipped out of sight. The second we docked, we were in the car and heading for the off ramp. For a minute I thought we'd got off before them, and then I hear, "Pull over here." They appeared out of nowhere as soon as the bleeding wheels hit dry land. We were the only car pulled over. The luggage was dragged out of the boot and its contents were literally dumped on the floor. Our clothes were strewn everywhere. "Search them," one of the bastards said to the other. He began to go through the clothes, picking them up as if they were diseased and throwing them on the ground, then barks at me to pick them all up. To which I replied, "You fucking pick them up, I ain't." Now Keith's giving it the "Hold on, Tom, old boy, they're only doing their job," because he thinks I've dumped the hash and I'm shitting myself. Then the nightmare got worse. They took the car into a garage and drove it over a pit so they could give it a right going over. That was it, I thought. I've fucking had it now. I was already making a mental note of what prison life would be like. Keith was just standing around looking very much the harassed rock star, so I thought I'd unload a bit of the worry on him. I sidled up to him and whispered in his ear that I hadn't managed to dump the gear and walked away. That's when his tone changed completely towards his interrogators. He's calling them fucking this and fucking that. All I could do was stand and watch with me arms folded, leaning against the petrol tank of the car. Eventually they figured they had searched the car sufficiently and we were frog-marched into separate rooms and I was strip-searched. Then, as quickly as we had been hauled in, We were bundled out of these rooms and basically told to fuck off. We drove for about 15 minutes and stopped. Then Keith says, "Well, we got out of that one, so you must have managed to dump it in the end. How did you do it when we were completely fucking surrounded?" "I haven't," I replied. "What?" Keith said. I sprung the petrol cap and said, "Here we are." Keith's face was a picture, but it didn't teach him anything. All he said was, "Fucking groovy," and he grabbed the dope and rolled a joint.
I hope you enjoyed this video about the trip to Morocco that changed the Stones forever. See you next time.